Peace, everybody. For January 2023, we bring an episode with ICHABOD, YME, Circle T, now available on our Patreon. ICHABOD is one of the undisputed kings of freight graffiti. Go anywhere in North America and watch the lines. Nearly every single time, you're going to see an ICHABOD. This is a feat that an extremely low number of writers have achieved in the entire history of freight graffiti. ICHABOD speaks on how he achieved this level of widespread presence on the lines, how he got into writing graph, exactly how many freights he's done, how he deeply studies freights and rails, how he keeps track of every freight he's done in codes, his past pyromaniac-like tendencies and interest in chemistry, his ideas on money, our society, and more. The full episode is now available on our Patreon, along with an episode from Learn YME, one of the people who ICHABOD first began painting graffiti with, who's been painting on freights since the very early days of the North American freight movement. Learn YME speaks on graffiti, overcoming depression, how the freight scene in North America has changed since he first started till now, and more. Both the ICHABOD and Learn YME episodes are available on our Patreon, along with Glare GH, a video recorded in New York featuring Glare painting trackside spots, highways, streets, and freights. The full video is now available on our Patreon. Members gain access to our Patreon library, featuring videos like Savvy OTR, All We Got Is Us 2, Jedi 5's You Win Some, You Lose Everything, Amuse 126, full episodes from ICHABOD, Learn, Dessa MTA, Bat and Ola, Lex PMS, Curve, Duel, Host 18, XSM, written interviews from Cheek and You Won't, and members are sent any monthly products we do like Living Proof Magazine, prints, mops, and more. Thank you as always to everybody who supports the show in any way. Enjoy the episode. Peace.
Hey, this is Claw Money, and you're listening to Angel and Z, sponsored by Art Primo. What is Art Primo, you ask? How dare you? Art Primo is a graffiti shop that was started by writers for writers in Seattle in 2001, and they have stayed true to their roots for over 20 years, offering everything from caps to inks, to paint, to refillable mops. They got nibs, they got jibs, they got caps, solids, zines, books, and more. And their how-to videos and YouTube channel are legendary. Art Primo strives to keep their prices low and quality high, hand pouring all of their mops and inks in their Seattle warehouse, shipping orders on the same day, and their site is a source of information for all types of writing tools. Tools for what? Tools for the revolution.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Wow, thanks. First of all, I should say thanks to you guys for your ultimate patience, man. It's been like a long time coming.
It's been a long time.
Pre-pandemic,
I feel like it's been like at least 1 year of like back and forth. And
I would argue to say more. And this shit fucked me up because somehow by accident I hit our correspondence, our DMs into some vanish mode.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm not sure how to obviously whatever.
I don't know how to take it out either.
I don't know how to get it back into like not vanish mode.
Yeah, it's
so
weird.
I was like, it pissed me off because I was like going to be like, oh shit, when did we start this conversation?
Yeah.
So I feel like it was like 2019 or something, or 2020. Like
it was really a while ago.
It was a while
so
ago.
I'm super hyped to finally make it happen. So
yeah, me too. Well, that's why I said when you reached out to me, I think earlier this year, I was like, I mean, it's crazy because it's fucking December 15th or whatever it is. So, but I remember thinking to myself, and I think I said to you in the text, of course I don't have it anymore. I was like, yo, no matter what we get on the docket for this year, like it's going to happen this year. And I was just like, whatever. I've been traveling and doing a lot of shit, and I don't live in the city full time, so it's just been a little bit more challenging.
For sure.
But
so I guess we wanted to start off by saying that from other interviews we saw that you have been writing. You started writing in 1981.
Yep.
And it is now 2023. So it's been a long time, and with that time, like seeing the world through the eyes of someone who's a graffiti writer, or seeing the world through the eyes of someone who's an artist and like works with collage, works with murals, and you're seeing the world in a different view than a lot of people would. What do you think about when you see the amount of change that's happened, not just in Queens but in New York as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because I mean, obviously it's kind of done a 180 in a lot of ways. I mean, in some ways, I mean, and even like talking about keeping anonymity and stuff like that. There is like, you can kind of, it's what you make it. It's like a long time ago, I think I wrote in DG's book, graffiti is what you make it. And it's like, in a lot of ways, I feel like that's really true. You can be real quiet about it, or you can be real like, today people are like, yo, I do this shit. Whereas like, when I grew up, 1981 and stuff like that, it's like, you didn't really tell people that's what you did, because then that's when someone else's mom would be like, you're the kid writing on school. So like you wouldn't really take tags on your, I mean, we wrote on our notebooks, but you wouldn't really take tags on like your knapsack and shit like that and try and keep some sort of anonymity. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess a lot's changed and not a lot's changed. I mean, like it's cool to still, I mean, sometimes I'm kind of amazed with like, just to go fast forward to today, to just see like, I mean, I know we went through the pandemic and that kind of created a situation for like lots of bombing to happen and stuff like that. But I'm just like, I don't know if I've ever, in some ways, even as bombed as the city was back then, there's parts that I feel like are more bombed today than it ever was bombed. I mean, I know a lot of people talk about even, you know, and I don't count, I don't really fully pay attention, but I see obviously a lot of trains getting painted and like whole trains and stuff like that. And I think like during the whole time graffiti happened between the early 70s and 89, there might have been like a couple of those. And I think even some of those, they got foiled by the cops. Like they tried to do one in 75th Avenue, like a Halloween one, but the dudes got chased and stuff like that, or some dudes got caught. And that's like in 1982 or something. But so yeah, so the volume today is just fucking wildly, like sometimes I mean, I guess people know about graffiti because like you have the internet and everyone knows about this shit now. But sometimes I still walk around the streets and I'm like, yo, I'm just like, what do like fucking lay people think? Like, or civilian people, just like when they come around, they're just like, the fuck happened here? Like someone just opened a can and just like blew up the whole place. So, you know, in some ways that's a bug out, you know, in some ways I'm also glad that graffiti's not on the trains like how it was back then, because even at this advanced age, it'd be probably pretty difficult for me to stay away from that. Mm-hmm. Whereas now, like, I don't really have any desire to do, it's fun to watch and it's cool to see that shit, but like, I'm good with that. But yeah, I don't know, as far as other things, you know, I don't know. I mean, you know, when I grew up, you know, it's like, or, you know, during the era that I grew up, it's like basically the 70s into the early, I mean, I was a toy in 1981, but that's when I first started writing, because back then everyone kind of wrote. I mean, I mean, I don't know if there's a same way today, but back then the epicenter of the neighborhood was the schoolyard. Everyone hung out in the schoolyard, whether they're smoking weed or playing handball, writing graffiti, drinking beers, listening to Rush, whatever the fuck it is. So everything kind of happened there, and you would see other stuff, and, you know, like people's older brothers wrote, and so they would like kind of hand us down tags, and, you know, we'd see drawings and stuff like that. So basically all my friends wrote graffiti like when I first started writing, and the school that I went to probably before pre-kindergarten to 6th grade, like the schoolyard was bombed the entire time throughout the 70s. They didn't clean it till like 1981 or 82. So like the time that I grew up and a lot of other people grew up, it's like it was just always there. You know what I mean? Graffiti was always there. It was always on the trains, and it was like you just never really thought it was going to go away. So in some ways, it's amazing that in whatever it was, 1989, that they like got it off the trains like from running, and of course that started a whole nother movement. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously there's a lot of differences. There's a lot more supplies. There's a lot more like people making businesses out of, you know, various, you know, graffiti supplies and stuff like that. So that's probably a big difference, because back then there was like, you know, you had only limited kind of colors, limited kind of brands and stuff like that. But that being said, like I still, I mean, you know, I'm not, you know, like how do I say, like I don't get down like that, but I still get down. So it's like, you know, I still make my own markers and shit like that, and make mixings and shit like that. So it's like, that's still fun to me. I just don't, you know, don't use it as much as maybe I once did. Whereas like, you know, you go to a layup, you know, you run through a 2 quarts of ink in like an afternoon. But
yeah, that's something I actually wanted to touch on, is like your early beginnings in starting graffiti. But before I even get into that, like I was just thinking while you were talking, 81 is when you started, and 89 is when they were cleaning the trains heavy. So it was a solid like 7 to 8 years of train activity prior to the clean. So did you get down initially with trains, or was it streets?
Well, I basically, like I said, I was like a toy, so it was really just my neighborhood. And it's funny because a lot of people, you know, I grew up in Forest Hills, and a lot of people later, you know, maybe in the mid 80s when I was a little bit more well known, would be like, you know, what the fuck, like dudes you write from Forest Hills, and they just like thinking like Tudor houses and trees and kind of stuff, which is true. And in a lot of ways, it was like when we first started bombing, it was really just light poles and mailboxes and schoolyards and stuff like that, handball courts. But in a lot of ways, you know, when I think back, just to talk about Forest Hills for a second, Forest Hills is actually an amazing fucking place to write graffiti, man. Because there's like, you have access to highways, tunnels, these train yards. Used to be not as much anymore, but there used to be crazy truck yards parked on Metropolitan Avenue. So you could just like, you could just go on the or Jackie Robinson now, just like, there was, Forest Park, there's tracks. I mean, there's just like infinite amount of places to write graffiti. But I didn't really actually write on a train until 1982. So, and like I said, even that, the first time I rode on a train was like with an El Marco, literally, like a train laid up on the station by my grandmother's house. And so between honestly, between 82 and like 84, I was more like, I would motion bomb. Like we would go into the layups and stuff like that, but like not too heavy, man. Like I was small. Like I'm not a big dude. Back then I was real small. And so like the layups are pretty wild back then. And so we would go in, but we would go in for like 15 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe take a marker, do like a bunch of out tags on the outside and stuff like that. So nothing really that noticeable. Like I said, we would do motion tags because like my home station was Continental Avenue. So back then it was the GG train. So we would sit in the back and just fucking take tags and that stuff, all the way to Roosevelt in between all the stops. But
how was the layup? You said it was wild.
Yeah, because
well, just like it was busy. You know what I mean? Like people would be in there. Like a lot of people visited.
Was it security for Graph?
No. I just mean like writers would be in there.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? I mean, I can remember one time going onto a platform, Union Turnpike, and again, I was like, I don't know, 13, and there was like, I forget, it was like a bunch of the RTW guys. I remember Paid was one of the guys there, maybe Quick, a few others, but they had just done fill-ins right on the platform, and you could tell because they did floaters, and a couple dudes did fill-ins right in the bottom. You could see the overspray on the station still, like right on the platform, and I was like, yo, they just did these. So we walk in the tunnel, and you hear a bunch of dudes downstairs. So sometimes, everyone was looking for Vicks back then, so we tried to be pretty careful, especially because it was like our neighborhood and stuff like that. So it's like we had some sense of like, ownership of the neighborhood, but it was also just like so many people went to that layup. It was hard to be like, well, this is our spot. Mm-hmm. So, but after a while, I definitely went there, hella times and shit like that. So, but yeah, I'd say it wasn't really till about 85 that I really started to like, kind of more seriously write on trains and like start to do fill-ins. Mm-hmm. And even then, man, I was just a bomber. Like I might have did about 12 or 13 pieces.
Yeah, because I was just gonna say, because you hear a lot of stories about how people would just go into the yards with like pizza and like cans of beer and essentially just hang out. Like was there a presence of like Vandal Squad or?
Yeah, I mean they were definitely around, but they would usually, at least my experience is that they would never show up in the layup. They would show up when you were like 3 or 4 blocks away, thinking you were like good, and then you'd get thrown up against the fucking building or something like that. Because I know that's what happened. There's a couple of cops that are pretty famous, Ferrari and Curly, who are like a couple of cops that patrolled around the 7 line and E and F line and stuff like that. And one time, I think in either 83 or 84, we went into the layup, did like a little bit, but I was like still kind of green, and like back then, all the tops of the staircases were bombed. Like when you walked into the staircases in the train station, they were just like all like fame spots and never had been buffed. All kinds of uni tags and stuff like that, and famous people. So I remember when I first started kind of going down there and hitting, I was like, yo, I want people to know that I'm here. And so we were good coming out of the layup, and there was no problem. But then I hit every staircase, and then they saw me on the on the token booth level, and so we were walking away, and we were like maybe about to turn onto Austin Street, and they threw us up against this like dry cleaner spot and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, as far as just like, back then also too, I can't front. I mean, I think about it because I was doing an interview not that long ago, and I was like, I didn't really start writing on trains a real lot. I was also like, I guess, around 83, 84, I was like 14, 15. So like, I mean, not to sound like a weirdo, but like getting laid was like a big deal. Mm-hmm. So like that, I spent a lot of time with girls and stuff like that. And so I think that's what like prevented me from doing maybe more graffiti then. And also too, like my parents were together. Like when I was younger, I had not a strict curfew, but like wasn't like I could stay out all night wild out with dudes who like, could just, their parents didn't really care where they were. They could just do whatever they wanted.
Do you have any memories of like going to those layups and going to these yards around, I'd say maybe 84, 85, when you have your 2-letter a little bit more developed and you're doing fill-ins on the trains? Do you have memories of what it was like? Like,
yeah.
Like, for example, was the entrance barbed wired out? Was there holes in the fence? Like, what was it really like when you would paint? Would you paint it at the layups? Would you paint it at yards? Like,
Well, first off, we have to shift it because it's really like the main time I rode was probably, I mean, the heaviest I rode on trains was between 85 and mostly 86 and 87.
Okay.
A little bit in 88 because I'd already gone to college, but I came back and I did hit a bunch of trains before they went out. But yeah, I mean, it was all kinds of different stuff. I mean, I know a lot of times back then there would be holes in train stations that would be there for years. And so we would just slip through holes they would never cut. I know at the M yard, I mean, there was like a bunch of different ways to get in the M yard. I mean, there was holes by the dead end street by the oval there, but I know later, like actually more like in '88, we were going there. There's like these, I forget the streets, but they're like those dead end streets there that like kind of go up against where like the train goes over before you get into the yard. And we would go down those dead end streets and climb high up those fences, and there'd be holes in the fence, but where like the ground is under the running train, and then you hide under there and then run into the yard from there. But yeah, other than that, I mean, like we went to a lot of tunnels. I mean, we'd go to like Van Sicklen or 175th, or our basically our kind of like home layup, or like the place that we would go all the time was Astoria. So like that was like our favorite place. Sometimes we bombed that place 2 times a day. We'd cut school, hit all the insides, and come back that night and hit all the outsides. And it was a great spot because sometimes there'd be 2 different layups, and a lot of the times they'd have like there'd be a little bit of everything there. There'd be some flats, there'd be some ridgies, there'd be a couple of bulldogs. So you'd catch a little bit of everything there. So, and that's really just, walking off the platform. So I'm trying to think of other places where, like, I mean, I know we went to Coney Island Yard. There back then you just had to pull the fence. Like they had like a sliding fence in there. All you had to do is like push it a little bit and just slide right in. I'm trying to think of other shit, if I'm forgetting anything, but.
I gotta ask, in Star Wars they talk about the dog running around the
Sure,
fence.
sure.
Was that real, or was that just...
Yeah, that was definitely real, but that was a little bit before my time. By the time I started really writing graffiti, the 7s were clean already.
Mm-hmm.
And so I never really went to the... I mean, I've been outside there, I've been around there, but not during that era when the dogs were like, I think... And actually, it's a good question, actually, because I think at some point they must have taken those dogs out or something like that.
It doesn't seem that practical, honestly.
No. It just, and also I remember hearing stories. I mean, again, I don't know what's the truth of it, but I definitely remember hearing stories of like older writers going there, putting like tranquilizers and meat and shit like that, and giving them the meat so the dogs would pass out.
Yeah, the stories from that era are honestly so crazy.
They're insane, and I argue to say a lot of them are true. Like you can't make those things up, but like obviously, I wasn't there, so these are things like you hear, like when you're a kid, like I remember hearing a lot, because I didn't even know when I was a kid, like, I thought Fuzz One was from Queens. I didn't even know he was from the Bronx because he made such an impact when he came to Queens that, I always just thought he was from Queens. So like, I know some of those stories kind of made me think of him because, again, I don't know if it was him, but I know I heard stories around like that era where people were doing shit like that in the 7 yard.
Yeah, I have a quote I want to read and then ask you a question afterwards, and it's about Vandal Squad. Founded in the 1980, the Vandal Squad's mission was to protect the subway system from hardcore criminal acts of destruction like kicking out windows and throwing seats out of train cars. It was only with the Clean Car program of '84 that graffiti became the primary focus of this specialized unit, using every means available, including the NYPD computer database, search warrants, and even vandals themselves. Which is funny because like 1980, 1984, all these dates are like co-aligning with you starting writing graffiti, progressing in writing graffiti, starting to hit the trains more. What was your experience like with VS of that time period? Because I hear a lot about, VS now and what they can and can't do or this and that, but when you think about VS, at least I think about like these types of stories. I think about the trains.
Yeah, no, I mean, luckily for me, I definitely got grabbed a few times over the years, but I didn't really get bagged that too much, thank God. But like, yeah, like, so the one time early on, which I'm going to say was probably '84 when Ferrari grabbed us. And then, I'm trying to think, and then I think it wasn't until like maybe sometime in maybe '86 or maybe the beginning of '87. I know it was winter time. We got rolled on at Astoria, and it was another kind of vandal cop, big, tall Irish dude, had like kind of reddish yellow hair. They called Goldie. And so, long story short, we were trying to get away. I was with this dude Dash, this other dude that wrote Hush, and Dash was able to get away. And these other 2 cops kind of, as we were trying to get away on the platform, these cops kind of popped out on us. They were like trying to front like they were reading a newspaper or whatever, like they were just there. And so this guy Goldie grabbed me, and I had a bag of paint, and like I don't know if he grabbed me first, but I basically swung a bag of paint at his head a couple of times just to try and keep him away and just like figure out what the fuck was going on. And then I tried to throw the bag onto a roof from there, but it just made it onto the sidewalk. So he basically grabbed me and like punched me in the back of the head, and I think like either the fifth or sixth time I hit the deck. And then the guys sat on us and stuff like that. It was fucked up too because the day before, see, this is like, I guess I got kind of amped because the day before is the only time I ever did an end-to-end whole car, and we did it on the A line. It was, yeah. So so it was February. Okay, so it was February '87 probably because that Valentine's Day, me, AI, and Dash, we did not a top to bottom, but an end-to-end on the A line, on a layup that's in between. I guess it was at 111th Street. I don't know if it's still there, but it was just a one-set layup. But it was in between two elevated spots on the A. But if you got to a certain part, neither platform could see you. But we did a fucking whole car there in broad daylight, you know. And I remember this dude that wrote Image was there, and this guy AI that we wrote, he was from that neighborhood, and like there's a handful of people like AI and Deck who were like, these guys had a sixth sense for writing graffiti and stuff like that. So like he just didn't care. But we've been getting a little bit off topic here, the Vandal Squad. But yeah, I mean, luckily I didn't have a lot of, luckily not too many interactions with them. I remember one time I did live in Astoria in the 90s, and I was coming home from work, and I had a bag of paint on me, and I was probably had a few drinks in me, and I was just like kind of passing out on the two-seater, and it pulled into like, I don't know, like maybe 30th Street or whatever, one of the spots that still has the layup there, and this had to be like maybe 96, and I'd only seen pictures of Tom and Jerry. Luckily never bumped into those guys, and I was on the platform, I was on the train stops, and I'm kind of like half in a daze, and I look and I see them and other cops running around chasing kids on the platform, and I recognize them, and they kind of stopped the train. They like got in the car and everything, and I know I wasn't doing anything, but I was like, shit, I have a bag of paint on me. So I was like, I probably looked the roll, I probably had paint on my clothes and stuff like that, but luckily nothing ever happened. But yeah, I mean, the crazy thing about that guy Goldie is that, I don't know, a few weeks later, Continental Avenue, with a couple of my friends, of course my friend had gotten away, and I see him frisking someone up against the wall. And I guess I should preface this with the night, I'm trying to make this a short story without getting too like crazy detailed. The night we got bagged in Astoria, they brought us back to the station. Some other writers came, and we didn't tell them what we really wrote. We made up other names, because at the time, I'm not saying we were kings of the lines, but we were hitting the fucking lines pretty hard. I mean, we were pretty much up on every B and R train at that point. And so we like gave them some crazy fake names, and these other writers came into the station and saw us, and the cops were like, we're going to take these other writers out on to the layup to see what you wrote. We hadn't finished. We had just done an end-to-end whole car throw-ups, but because I was like, we did like I said, we did a whole car the day before in broad daylight. So I was like, as soon as it gets dark between the fucking whole car, I was like, this is it, that's it. And so whatever. So they went out there. They unfortunately couldn't read it, but they were like taunting us and be like, yeah, you guys are some toys and shit like that. And like, I was like, you guys have no idea, you know what I mean? So, but at the time it was just better to like keep it low key. So luckily that happened. But like I said, a couple weeks later, I see this guy Goldie frisking someone in Continental Avenue. And for whatever reason, I felt comfortable to kind of like slap him on the back and be like, hey Goldie, how you doing? What's going on? And he immediately like threw me up against the wall. It was just like, I know you've been back there. And of course I hadn't been back. I had hit other trains that maybe switched those lines or whatever, or he had figured out what we wrote or some shit. But he gave me a hard time. He kind of like, grabbed me by my neck and threw me against the wall. And he's like, if you fucking go back there and blah, blah, blah. So of course, like, 2 months later, I was going back there. But it was just crazy. And I was like, I remember thinking later, I was like, I probably was so smart to like tap him on the shoulder. I should just walk by him like, like nothing. But I just, when you're 17,
Why do you think that you gravitated towards writing graffiti, and not just gravitated towards it, but ended up sticking with it and, doing your thing with it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, like, I was like, my parents were both like art history majors. And so like my mom would do like graphic design stuff. She had a studio like right outside my bedroom. So you used to have those little Liquitex markers, those little markers in the glass bottles and stuff like that. And so I used to kind of like play with those and like, steal those out of her studio and stuff like that. And I used to draw with my dad. He was like a really good draftsman and stuff like that. So at a really young age, I was kind of like, well, I don't understand why you guys don't do art as professionals. And my dad sold computers, my mom was doing catering and stuff like that. And they're like, when you're like 10, 11, you don't really understand. Like, we're doing more practical. We have to make money, and art's not the easiest road traveled. So at a very early age, for better or for worse, I was like, I'm not gonna let this go. And like I had been pretty much drawing ever since I could hold a crayon and stuff like that. So when graffiti came around, and I was probably around like 5th grade, and then like around 80, 81, it's like that's when the graffiti scene started to pop off in the galleries and stuff like that. And like Dondi would have like the Fun Gallery was happening, and all these places were happening. So my parents were being interested in art. They were also mild art collectors and stuff like that. So they saw it as like kind of harmless. And as a matter of fact, even when I first started, they gave me a room in the basement to paint it, which of course I don't have one photo of, which is unfortunate. But so we would go to these places like Graffiti Above Ground, or to Fun Gallery, or Tony Shafrazi, or wherever there was a show, and they were interested in it also. So I think that the combination of me trying to do art and like trying to kind of stick with it and stuff like that, like I mean basically like I said, all my friends kind of started writing around the same time at 81, but by like 84, 85, a lot of them started vegging off. They wanted to go to clubs, they wanted to start trying to act like an adults, or start selling drugs or what have you. And I don't know, as I'm trying to answer the question and stuff like that, I'm not sure why I completely stuck with it, but I did. Like it just there was a handful of people that's after, like I say, 1985 still stuck with it. And it was fun. By by 85, 86, it was like then I developed a method to sneak out of my house, and so it was like a lot easier to get out and break night and hit trains and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. Just it was like I was artistically inclined, and like I just kind of stuck with it. I mean, there was a lot of people that influenced me. Like I never had a mentor. So, but when I went to junior high school, I went to school with this dude Rab. Fortunately, he passed away last year, and he was like incredible, and he just really good at piecing. And he was bombing. He was like getting up at the time. He was hitting the lines. He was hitting the numbers. He was hitting the letter lines. So and he was doing good amount of pieces that were running. So he was a big influence. So I definitely bit off of his shit early on. But I would also argue to say, even though I don't want to speak for everybody, that he was so influential in my neighborhood growing up then that he influenced a whole group of kids from Forest Hills and Rego Park during that era. And he would bring like black books to school, like he'd bring like Python's black book or Weber's black book, or these guys from up in Mount Vernon, like Leroy and Rem 311. So he just exposed me like to all this crazy stuff that back then, you grow up in Queens, like Mount Vernon seemed like like in another country, so but so there was a lot of that, and there was some encouragement. Like I said, like early on, it's like there wasn't like a lot of people, like you didn't really say, this is what I do, to like or certain people you would let know, or other people that wrote. But like I had an art teacher also too, who was like, he wasn't really judgmental about it, and so he didn't really encourage me to write on trains and get in trouble, but he was like, encouraged me art wise, and like he's definitely, I think, one of those people that like, probably made me want to like continue to do this kind of stuff, or like just continue with art and do what follow my my dream or whatever. Doing that.
Oh, it's amazing. And it's been like over 4 decades now, which is it's pretty insane. Like there's not that many people left, or you could even say alive, that stuck with graffiti that long, and so it seems like you've been, because a lot of people they dabble in it and then they like fall off for like a lot for a few years, or like it's kind of like a spotty in their life. But with you, it seems very consistent, and not only consistent, but it seems almost like a priority in your life nowadays. So how do you have the motivation for over 40 years to keep this alive?
Like I said, I still get down. I don't paint as much as I used to. I mean, but obviously I was one of, I guess one of the other parts of it too is that I was one of the only guys, or one of the few guys, because when I wrote graffiti on the trains and highways and stuff like that, like just to throw in that bracket between 85 and 89, like the dudes I wrote with, and myself included, we're all bombers, man. We did throw ups and mob tags and stuff like that, and that was like that's what we really did. Because like, to be honest with you, and it probably kind of coincides with what you're saying there about like kind of the Vandal Squad in 84 being kind of more concentrated, is that not only were they more concentrated on it, but the trains, like if you talk about like trains that were painted in like the late 70s, some of those trains would run for years. Some of those pieces would run for years. By the time it got to about like 84, 85, and a lot of those old school guys who started in the 70s and petered out in the early 80s, trains started, like shit just started getting gone over. Like no one really, so like the idea of doing pieces sometimes didn't really even make any sense. And also too, sometimes we go bombing and we go with like 10 guys. And I remember like, oh, I'm going to do a piece today. So I do a panel piece. These guys would be like 7, 8 cars down and just blasted the whole thing with throw-ups. And I'd be like, there's no room for me to do throw-ups here. So it was like kind of a competition like that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think being, enjoying letters and like being into making letters and doing and making pieces and stuff like that, I think that's something that's really kind of kept me going, because like there's always something that I enjoy about like evolving my style. I mean, obviously my throw ups and tags, I mean, they do change. I mean, sometimes when I look at my tags, I feel like even though it's recognizable, like every single one I do is like kind of different. Mm-hmm. And so I think, developing my style over years and stuff like that was something that I was really into. Obviously I did, I started making collages and artworks pretty early in life too. Like I was saying earlier, like life kind of revolved around the schoolyard. And so like, during the summer, like fireworks were a big thing. The place would be littered with firework wrappers and like wrapping papers from like Easy Widers and bamboo, even before I knew what they really were. And it was as early 80s. And so I would start making collages. My mom made collages. Like I said, she had a studio. She would make some collages. So I kind of like got inspired by her. And so I started making my first collages of like firework wrappers and stuff like that. And I liked the graphics. And I think like, building off all that stuff, like, the firework wrappers, comic books, rock band names and stuff like that, like that just really got me into doing letters and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's something, like I said, I think early on, I was just like, yeah, I'm never really going to let this go. I mean, there have definitely been ebbs and flows where certain years I've done less than other years. But it's true. Like sometimes I always wonder, because like some dudes, writers would just like fall out for like 10 years. And all of a sudden they'd be back on the scene again. And I would just be like, yo, I don't know if I could do that. You know what I mean? Like I always kind of wanted to kind of kept sharpening the skills and stuff like that. So that's definitely a reason. But and it also kind of runs parallel with my artwork. I mean, that's why after I graduated college, doing skills was a kind of a big deal, because then that kind of really was the first time I was able to kind of marry all the stuff that I did into one project.
Yeah, and I want to talk about skills for sure. But I have another question about like graph and stuff. Yeah. And one of the things that I noticed was I was looking through your just through different pictures of your throwaway online. Now seeing like a lot of stuff dated like 95, 96, 97, 98. A lot of fill-ins dated with these years. And what came to my mind was just the thought of like, do you think it's possible or even beneficial or productive to be a long-term bomber? Because, there's so few writers that have done it, probably because it's not that, like productive in terms of like, you have to give up all the other facets of your life. So what do you think about that? Because clearly there was a time where you were just going like thoroughly crazy.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, we can circle back to skills and stuff like that, but I did skills between 92 and 95 when I was living outside of Boston. And so that was great, but we were also doing a lot of stuff in Boston. And so they had their own little Vandal Squad there. And just by nature of doing the magazine, even though they couldn't prove that I did it, it kind of put a bullseye on my back a little bit, because then they were like, you're the one that's responsible for all these kids writing graffiti in the suburbs. And even though there's some truth to that, they were really trying to press me hard and stuff like that. So by the time 95 came around, I moved back to New York in 95. And I was like, you know what? I just want to kind of start fresh. I stopped doing the magazine, and I was just like, I want to kind of just like get lost again. And so I was living in Astoria, and it was like one of those like perfect situations where I was like living on like 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever 23rd Avenue between 24, some crazy like Queens address, and it was like a basement apartment that like, even if you knew where I lived, I don't think you'd find it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So it was a really good place for me to be. And so, so the 90s, I still kind of continued to paint a lot. I mean, one of the things that I wanted to do was I was starting to document more. And so that kind of made me kind of go around the city and go to more places and stuff like that. But I mean, I was still pretty active. I mean, I was like in my late 20s at that point. And I connected with a bunch of people. I'd connected with Revs and a bunch of other people. Ezo was someone who was someone I looked up to growing up. So
I saw a picture of a roller you did with Espo and KR.
Yeah, that was probably 99. I did a handful of rollers back then. That was like a thing that I don't want to say, I mean, obviously other people did it before we did, but that was like starting to become a thing then. Mm-hmm. Whereas now it's like you look at every roof and it's like bombed. But I mean, I think, to kind of speak to what you were saying before, like I definitely don't. I mean, if you're really active, that's like a full-time job, man. I mean, you're out there whether you rack or not or whatever. but you're out, you're out all night, you're sleeping all day, you're taking flicks, you're going to get your day flicks. It's like a constant cycle. So I can't say that I've really done that in many years. You know what I mean? But that being said, when I have the opportunity, I mean, like this year, like I don't really know if I could have a bucket list in graffiti, but in like January or February, I did a freight with Zephyr. And after doing that, I was kind of like, oh shit, that's kind of bucket list-ish, I mean, I'd painted some walls with him before, but that was kind of a cool thing to that was like actually, I think the first piece I did this year. So I was kind of like, it's a good way to set it off. But yeah, I mean, it's really just like right now, it's really just like getting where I fit in, you know what I mean? And it's just like, I'm not really interested. I mean, like, I mean, sometimes you get tempted to do like streets or something like that. But like I said, if anything, I do streets. Like I have a mop that I make. I'll maybe take a tag here or there and stuff like that. But like I don't really have the interest as much. I mean, the only things that really interest me are like tunnels and freights, really. So like, and I don't really. I mean, I've been in tunnels a couple times this year. It was really more to just photograph stuff. But those are really the only things I really like kind of enjoy writing graffiti on, because like tunnels are a cool spot and there's like a lot of history down there. To try and explain to people who don't understand, it's like an underground museum, certain places. But and then freights are fun. I mean, I was never really like a huge freight writer, but I guess when I was in Boston in like '91, I guess I started kind of writing on freights because there's no real reason to write on freights in New York. We were writing on subways, so. But luckily I get to do that a handful of times a year. Get to pop down underground a handful of times a year, and that kind of sustains me now. But yeah, it's if you're really, sometimes I see I see people paint. I see people close to my age painting, and I'm like, they got to be out there 3-4 nights a week. Like that's a full-time thing,
Yeah, no, 100%. Because like I said, I feel like not many people do that, and just because it's just not very feasible.
Well, no, I mean, I'm much older now, so it's like I have obviously a lot more responsibility to do when I was a kid and stuff like that. And also, obviously, my interests are elsewhere and stuff like that. But it is just kind of one of those things. Like I always kind of think of like Style Wars. I mean, obviously, rest in peace, and Iz was a good guy, and I got a chance to do some stuff with him and interview him. And so I actually have an interview with him that I need to like put onto digital. That I interviewed him before he moved from Rockaway, and I always kind of think of that scene in Style Wars where he's like, I'll come around, do some throw-ups, let people know I'm still around. And I guess that's kind of like how I feel, is like, I let people, I mean, like, because at this stage in the game, it's really, and even for a bunch of years, it's really just for me. You know what I mean? I'm not writing graffiti for anybody else. Like in some ways, for me, I think it's cooler when you have less tags because it's more rare. You're like, oh shit, there's a fucking this, you know what I mean? So I kind of dig, I mean, nothing against people getting up. I mean, that's where it's at. I get it. But for me at this stage, I kind of like the rarity of graffiti and stuff like that. So to me, if I get to paint, trains or tunnels like 10, 12 times a year or whatever, once a month or something like that, that could sustain me. I mean, sure, there's times I'd love to go do more, but it's just not always in the cards.
Do you ever feel the responsibility to kind of, I don't know, set the standard of graffiti or keeping the letter structures alive, because I feel, sometimes it seems like the youth coming up, they don't maybe research as much as they should, or do you ever feel like you kind of set an example to maybe up-and-coming writers or even writers that have been doing it for a while to, show them kind of the original ways,
I mean, I hope so. I mean, to me, like I said, like I didn't have a mentor, so I was inspired by like a million dudes, and like my style is kind of like a culmination of like all this stuff that I saw growing up. And I kind of think that that's one of the things that's special about graffiti is that everyone has, a time and era that they grew up in, and what the first thing they saw or the first thing that kind of inspired them to do that. So, if I have positive influence over people, I'm all for it, But at the same time, I'm not trying to, tell people how to write graffiti. Like, it's like the less rules, the better. Or like, that's kind of the fun part of it. I mean, like, obviously there's some rules, but at the same time, it's like, that's the joy of it, is that like, at any given time, at every given place, you could just like bust out and no one's going to know, only you. And so like, that's kind of a nice thing. But as far as style and stuff like that, I mean, I think there's always going to be people that do pieces. I mean, like there's a lot of guys out now that I think are, amazing with pieces, like way advanced with the pieces and stuff like that. And it's also cool to see people still doing like decent throw-ups. I mean, there's a lot of garbage throw-ups out there, but it's always kind of been that way. And, I'm sure at one point when I was a toy, my throw-ups were garbage. So it's like, that's just how it goes. But I guess one of the things that does bug me out, or is maybe speaks to what you're saying, is that like there's certain things that are in graffiti that are like have been there almost since day one. Because like, and again, maybe other older writers could shed maybe better light on it, but from what research and what I know, you could go back to like Phase 2, or like this guy In Top who wrote Kill 3, and they did like, Phase had an H, he had a K for Kill 3. From what I know, they're the first ones that kind of did those letters where like you do an R, you do a K, and it has like a bubble at the bottom, stuff like that. So they kind of started that. Now everyone does that, but hopefully everyone's kind of made it their own. I mean, I'll use Scuff as an example. Like he does kind of that K that's kind of born out of that old style, but he made it his. You know what I mean? So I think, when I see that going on, that feels good, because then you feel like, okay, whether people know that that's from Phase 2 or from that people have been doing that for so long, it is what it is. But at the same time, you do get a sense that styles are kind of like handed down. I mean, I don't know what like the newer generation thinks about like, like biting is like a crime, right? So like biting is one thing, but like I think people now, it seems like, emulating or, getting ideas from or something like that is like, it seems like it's much more commonplace now. And it's like more like, hey, I'm inspired by, and which I think is okay. I mean, again, it's like, Scuff was inspired by, various letters, but he made it his own. And so I think that's what I see a lot of other writers doing, you know what I mean, is that they'll take a throw up or they'll take a letter and they'll make it their own. But the roots of some of those lines in there go way back to the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like this is the culture that we're in now. You're more likely to like say that you're inspired rather than you bit. Whereas I feel like from all the like information that I've seen and heard from people and just conversations that I've had, it's more like the writing culture was just a lot more aggressive back then. Like, you bit my shit, now I'm gonna fuck you up. Yeah. Whereas like now it's I can only speak for the generation that we're in now, and I can't speak for one before me, right. But it just seems pretty clear that it was a lot more rugged back then.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, it definitely was like, I saw something recently on Instagram, I forget what it was, but it was just saying that like in New York, like showing people love is almost like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which I thought, that's not totally true, because I was like, if you know real New Yorkers that do show a lot of love in New York, and like it's more real in some ways, whereas like you go to other places and sometimes people be nice in your face, but then they talk shit behind your back. And not to say that doesn't happen here, but like I feel like in New York, you know where you stand with people. You know what I mean? Like people, unless people are just, full of shit, you kind of know where you stand. And so like that's, I think, an important thing. But yeah, it was definitely way more aggressive back then. From what again, I'm sure that there's still shit going. I'm sure people are still getting stabbed and what have you. But yeah,
just in general.
Yeah, well, it was like there was not a lot of like you didn't show other people love, like you didn't. Even like not because I wasn't showing people love, but like I didn't really start taking photographs of like my graph on trains until like 85, 86.
Yeah.
And even then, I just took pictures of me and my crew. I didn't like step back and be like, oh shit, I should take a picture of this whole train.
Yeah.
I would get like close-ups of art throw-ups, and that's it. Like that's all I was really cared about. Also, too, back then, I guess it's a little bit of a different gig, because like you had rolls of film that had like 24 rolls, there's 36, so you were a little bit more selective with your shooting. Whereas now you just just blast off whatever. But yeah, it was definitely a lot more. People, like, you had to just like be mindful of shit a lot more.
How'd you start this magazine, Skills Magazine, that you brought us, issue number 7? It's crazy that you still have this, first of all, and like how well preserved it is. This is amazing. Like on the first page, there's like, it just looks, it looks amazing. So how did you start this magazine? How did you learn the process of making it? I know you went to school for like graphic design. Did it have anything to do with it, or?
No, not really. I did major in graphic design in college. So I graduated college in 1991, and I was living outside of Boston. And by chance, I bumped into a guy, and I didn't really, to be honest with you, I wasn't really big into magazines. I never really collected IGT. I was aware of it, but I was more like, I had the books. I had like, Subway Art, Style Wars was like a big thing. So I would say that those are probably more influential to me. Like I had really no desire to make a magazine, but in 1991 the jobs market was pretty shitty. So after I graduated college, I went cross country for 3 months, and when I came back, tried to get a job. It was kind of difficult. So I just by chance I bumped into a guy that I graduated with, and he was the night manager of this place called Copy Cop, which is kind of like a Kinko's, like a copy place. And he was like, "Hey man," he's like, "I'm in there all night long. There's no one comes in." He's like, "You ever want to make any color copies? Let me know." So shortly after, I approached him. I said, "Well, they had saddle stitchers there and all this stuff." I was like, well, "Make a magazine, So the first 4 issues of Skills were made at this Copy Cop in like the financial district in Boston, and they were all like half color copies and half black and white copies. And so we started, like I think we made like 100 magazines, and the first magazine was like just like a fold out, so like that. And even back then I had no computer, so like the first magazines I literally would lay out on pieces of paper, like cut the photos out, and would continue to do that. Even when I made these issues, I still didn't have a computer. So basically,
so these were all cutouts.
Yeah, those are all cut out. So basically what happened is that when I did start to print it professionally, I had to deal with drum scans, and even back then a drum scan was like $10-15 a scan, and I'm like, listen, there's like 200 and some odd photos in here. I don't have that kind of money to pay for these scans. So luckily I worked with the printers and stuff like that, and they were like, well, how about you design these pages and we'll just scan each page as one photo. And I was like, all right, that's much more feasible. So I continued to kind of do like a collage style and cut out stuff and make layouts and stuff like that with just cut and paste. So so it really was just like everything was hand done. I mean, the only stuff that like maybe towards the later issues is my dad had a computer, and I would like maybe type out some of the masthead on computer and then like literally cut and paste that as well. But even the first few issues, everything was like handwritten. The logo was hand done. Everything.
How did you contact people like Mobb Deep or like even just contacting people back then must have been so different from, for example, the way that we contact people. Like you got a lot of people in here, like on the second page, or I guess the first page, there's like Dessa doing a motion on an M train that's headed to Metropolitan Avenue. There's like a portrait photo of like the Mobb Deep crew. There's a lot of stuff, and how did you contact all these people? Or
well, basically, I mean that's kind of what's kind of happened during that time is that like I would have a PO box, and like the first couple issues of Skills were mostly my flicks and like Boston stuff, and then even the third and fourth issues were like flicks that I borrowed from people, made into a layout, and then gave them the photos back. But maybe by the fourth, fifth issue, then I started getting a trickle in the mail from in my PO box and stuff like that, and it just really kind of went from there. And back then, even though I wasn't that successful, I tried to align myself with like hip hop a little bit, because we were trying to get ad money from record labels.
Wow, you have a Mobb Deep interview in here? Yeah. Look at this. Do you mind if I read this?
No, go ahead.
The Queensbridge housing projects, tucked away inside the industrialized womb of Long Island City, New York, in the borough of crazy-ass Queens, has nurtured many an MC, producer, and on the ink and aerosol tip graffiti writers, infecting hip-hop culture's vast triangle of ghetto-centric communications with a doped-up virus that's laced with beatboxed devastation. Contrary to what KRS-One once said, the bridge ain't over. A generation after, etc. And then like you have an interview with is it Prodigy?
Yeah, it's Prodigy and Havoc.
Okay.
But let me first like shout this out. So You see the person who's doing the interview says 1971.
Yeah.
So, well, shout to Sasha Jenkins. He did that interview. I was there for that, of course. But he was working for Vibe magazine at the time, and I don't think he could write for any other magazines, so he couldn't write under his real name. So he just wrote it as 1971. So that little lovely paragraph he wrote there, that's his handiwork.
Okay.
But yeah, so we, but a lot of us, back then we kind of worked together. He was part of the kind of like the videograph guys back then. So, a lot of people started kind of, working with each other, be like, hey, would you write this? Or like, I know Zephyr wrote some articles for like some European magazines early on. And so it's really just like, it's just kind of like people started really connecting in like a real way. I mean, I remember when I would do the magazine, I would, come out with an issue, I would drop at the stores in Boston, and then I would literally drive from Boston, hit Rhode Island, hit Connecticut, hit New York, hit New Jersey, and then stop and hit Philly, and hit all these spots, you know, because basically it was in these like really random like skate shops or like record stores. It was like not like a big thing. So I would kind of distribute it myself in the beginning, and then shortly after, then Tower Records started kind of like, you know, selling graffiti magazines and stuff like that. So these last couple issues, this last issue, number 7, we made 10,000 issues.
Wow.
So, but whereas the first issue we only made 100. So, but they would take them in bulk. I mean, they would buy like, you know, 2,500 issues or keep on buying. And back then, they would pay you, even if like this shit's got stolen. So like, people would just be like, just, you know, go to Tower Records, just take them, whatever. We're still going to get paid for them because they're going to see that they're not there. So, but then Tower Records went out of business. A lot of these, you know, I depend on a lot of other distributors. I mean, there's like a whole network of people. I mean, like there was like a whole kind of zine scene, you know, like, I mean, between 92 and 95, when I did the magazine, I would say like a lot of magazines came to be. And also a lot of scenes, like a lot of graffiti scenes in other countries and other states started to take hold where there was never really a graffiti scene before.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it just kind of kept on building and building. And I guess that's why I say the first issue, we only did 7 issues, and I didn't do it like on a quarterly basis. It was kind of like.
So this was the last issue?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So it was kind of just like it came out when it could come out. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like no subscriptions or no, it was like when it was done kind of thing. So like there's a couple of issues where like I made like 2 or 3 issues a year, and then there's one issue, like I made an issue once a year.
Why did you stop making it?
Well, like I was saying before, like we started to get into a lot of trouble in Boston because we were doing a lot of trains and stuff, and so they knew that I did the magazine, but they couldn't really prove it. So they tried to get us into court and do a bunch of things and stuff like that. So how do I say it? Like basically we were on like the MBTA property, and they didn't catch us, but we happened to have our cars parked in the fucking lot for the MBTA, so they were able to tow them. So we had to go back to their like, you know, compound off off I-93 there. And we didn't really get arrested, but they like questioned us, and they were like, you know, and I was like 22 or whatever, so I was like, fuck you, this is bullshit. I was like, you bring us here, you tow our fucking cars, like you didn't catch us doing anything, like what is this? And so I was like, I want my fucking car, I want to get the fuck out of here. And they're like, oh, we want to take a look inside your car. And I was like, yeah, fuck off. They're like, all right, well, we'll just take us 3 weeks to get a search warrant. And I was like, all right, fine, go look through the car. And they did find a pair of bolt cutters, which I had used, but maybe some stickers or something. There wasn't really much in there. So long story short is that they were like, well, we're going to try and get this in front of a magistrate and try and take this to court and try and take you to court and stuff like that. So that was like at the beginning of the summer of like maybe 93 or 94. And like after the summer, I got some letter in the mail, you had to appear. And so we appeared. And they were just like, yeah, we're going to take you to court and da-da-da. So we went to court, and I was like, at that point, I was just like, I'm not fucking hiring a lawyer. So I like kind of tried to coach this, like, we got like, you know, one of those legal guys. And so I tried to explain to him. And back then, like, there was, you know, yeah, well, there's a lot of shit. But basically, they were trying to say that I did that. And I was just like, do you see my name on there anywhere? That's why, I mean, it sounds silly now. It says like publisher the man and like editor the other man and stuff like that. But it was like kind of done purposely because they, you know, they were trying to like really, they wanted me to do like,
yeah, that's crazy.
300 hours community service and like 6 months suspended sentences and all this crazy stuff. And so basically we lucked out. I had to go see like a probation officer and stuff like that. It was like, it got kind of ridiculous. And I was just kind of like, I would have to go to the criminal court building at fucking Dorchester, and it's just like, I started to feel like a fucking criminal. And I was just like, you know, this is whack.
It just doesn't seem, honestly, like a solid case that they had, because it's kind of them just saying like, oh, you're influencing. It's like me saying like, oh, like, I'm out catching rat because I'm influenced by Dunkin' Donuts bubble letters.
Yeah, yeah. Well, back then, I mean, I think they were still trying to figure it out. I mean, in New York, I mean, the 90s, I mean, I don't know what it's like today necessarily, but like back then, you know, Giuliani was the mayor here in the city, and I forget, I was just talking to someone about this not that long ago, like there was some judge up in the Bronx who signed all these like warrants and so like people's houses started getting raided on like a more regular basis in the 90s. And so Boston was kind of, I think, trying to follow in that mold. So like when I left in 95, there's a bunch of other guys, some that I don't know, But people started getting caught up there and doing like 6-month stretches, year stretches and stuff like that. And I'd be like, felt like, yeah, I got out of there at the right time, because they were really trying to put it all on me. And so that's why, so when I came to New York, I had a P.O. box set up in Kew Gardens, and I had it set up, and I'm still getting, the truth of the matter is I still got mail till about like 1997, so I got mail for a long time. But I just was like, you know what, I don't need this hassle. Like, you know what I mean? It was like a great experience, and it was like great to do the magazine. Like the connections I made were amazing. But I just was like, you know, I was still, you know, like you were saying, you've seen these 90s stuff, like I was still in it. So I didn't really want to be like that guy. And also too, it got annoying in some ways, because a lot of people were like, yo, hook me up, you know, this and that. And I just wanted to be like normal again, kind of.
Do you think that printed matter, because, you know, like printed work in general is kind of like nowhere near as popular as it once was,
right, because
of the price versus digital, and you can just do shit digital. But there is something to be said about like having this, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what do you think about, especially as an artist, like the new modes of like art, the new modes of sharing stuff, whether it be Instagram or augmented reality or all of this stuff, where it just like causes a bunch of stuff, but one of the things it causes is that stuff like this doesn't get made as often.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still pretty much living in the tangible world. I mean, I've never done like NFTs or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, I kind of understand it a little bit, but it just didn't really seem like it was for me right now. I mean, you know, being that I do collage stuff, I mean, obviously I do a ton of work on the computer. I mean, I basically have two wings. I have my studio practice and I have my commercial practice. So obviously I use the computer a lot, but most of the stuff I do is by hand. Like in my studio, like I don't have a computer there. Everything is done by hand. I mean, I just have my phone, and I basically document stuff with the phone, and that's about it. But yeah, I mean, it's cool. I mean, Instagram, I mean, you know, it's kind of a necessary evil, you know what I mean? It's like, it's helpful to reach people. It's, you know, I mean, for me too, like, you know, I had an assistant for a long time, and she moved. And so I basically, when I do projects like that, sometimes I have an assistant on kind of a project to project basis. So a lot of times in my studio, I mean, I'm like an only child, so I'm like good with being, you know, by myself. And sometimes I like to kind of get into like that mode where there's not someone buzzing around me. So I do a lot of work, you know, in my studio by myself, stuff like that. So Instagram is fun as a tool to kind of share what you're doing, or like let people know. I mean, of course, I kind of like to police myself a little bit, because I see a lot of people putting shit out there that's like, life is so great, or everything's awesome, or like, look how dope I am, or whatever. So I kind of try and find a balance of like, you know, wanting to share stuff, but I also don't want to be like, yo, I'm fucking dope, you know, don't, you know, whatever. So, and I think also too, that's just kind of part of who I am and stuff like that, which sometimes I think perplexes people, because like, I don't ever really like, you know, I'm happy for people when they do good, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to see people doing bad, or like, especially, you know, guys from my era or whatever, there are hard times, like, that doesn't make me happy and shit like that. I'm not like, want to push someone when they're down, but at the same time, like, I don't really feel like I'm in competition with anybody, you know what I mean? Like, I'm in competition with myself, and like, that's just kind of the always way I've been. And so I think sometimes, I know over the years I've interacted with other writers, and they're just like, they couldn't really understand where I was coming from, or like why certain things weren't bothering me or whatever. And I would just be like, you know, these things don't matter. I was just like, I want people to do good. I mean, I think I want graffiti as a collective to be stronger, you know what I mean? And so it's like, I'm happy when people do dope shit, or like, and even now it's like, fuck, I mean, I can't front, man. I just saw it live for the first time, like, this, what was it on, like, Bowery, just like this MQ roller. And I was just like, god damn, bro, like, that's insane. Like, it's like 2 colors or whatever, things like half the side of the building. So like, I'm kind of always like constantly amazed with what people do and stuff like that. So, and I kind of like seeing people, you know, push things forward, or do, you know, hit spots that never been hit. I mean, it's kind of, I guess it's more like, I guess, old man graffiti, but like everyone's now into like kind of like the micro stickers and stuff like that. And so like, that's kind of fun. So, you know, I mean, stickers, I mean, I've always kind of looked at, even when we did stickers back in the 80s, I always kind of looked at stickers as like crack. I mean, they're kind of like the crack of graffiti, because like, basically you put a sticker up, if one person sees that sticker, it's done its job, I feel like. So if you put a sticker up somewhere and it stays somewhere for 10 years, it's like, that's kind of amazing. But I always just felt like, you know, if one person sees that, then that's it. It's like a one hit, and then you got to do another and another. So I guess with the little stickers, that's kind of where a bunch of us have kind of gotten a little crazy with that stuff. But it's fun, you know, it's fun.
Yeah. So, but in terms of like the printed matter and just like, You like to stick to just the tangible stuff, and it doesn't really.
For the most part, I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously, you know,
I mean, you do collage work.
Yeah, I mean, I still work with my hands
paintings,
like that.
yeah.
Everything's like made by hand, made by me. I mean, you know, like I said, the only time I really have assistance maybe if I'm painting something large or something like that. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's just I guess the time I grew up in or whatever. It's just I'm always going to have like a hands-on approach to like anything that I work on.
How did you get into? And did you find it a struggle when you were? You've always been into art and stuff, but when you were like doing it more like officially as like this is like my thing. Look, you can. I'm also pursuing this almost like as a career as well. I'm taking this seriously.
Yeah.
When you started doing that, did you find any difficulty getting like legitimacy in terms of like, oh, I'm a graph writer now, I'm this or?
You know, it's a mixed bag because I think when a lot of people who are like my age are starting to go into more galleries, there's also like the late '90s, '99 or 2000 stuff like that, and myself included. You know, of course, then you know, a lot of people, or maybe myself more. I was still, you know, a little bit like trying to keep my face private, my name private, and stuff like that. So that doesn't totally work when you're trying to transition into the art world and stuff like that. So obviously, I still enjoy having some sort of anonymity. So maybe it wasn't the best power move or what have you, but I remember thinking to myself too, like when people did start showing in galleries in a real way, then a bunch of people started getting caught too, like a bunch of kind of high profile kind of people. Once they were kind of out in the open, then they're like their houses got raided and all this shit. So again, I kind of fell back a little bit and was like, oh shit. I was like, all right, if I do this, I got to be careful. But at the same time, I think trying to be an artist and having a name and like, I mean, for lack of a better term, a brand. It's not really a brand, but like kind of having the graffiti tag is kind of like that or parallel to that.
Yeah, it is for sure.
And so I think that in some ways is helpful because you already have somewhat of a built-in audience. You have people know, at least people know like, oh, you have a history and stuff like that. So in that way, I felt that was beneficial. But it just like kind of navigating into the art world and feeling comfortable of just being, you know, open about things. I think for me took a few years to be comfortable with. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's good. I mean, yeah, in some ways, you know, I mean, today, you know, people I think have a much better appreciation for graffiti art and what, you know, comes out of it because the truth of the matter is that, you know, to me, there's like almost like two lanes. It's like, you know, bombing and graffiti. That's on its own. Like, I mean, you can do throw ups in a gallery and that's fine. But to me, you know, that's like its own thing. But evolving certain things and like, you know, even we talk about the collage work and stuff like that. It's like a lot of the collage work I do is inspired by, you know, a lot of the aesthetics that come from graffiti, which I think is like really rich for mining because, you know, whether it's layering or movement or color or texture, there's just all these things that are there that I just think are really ripe for like investigating and like trying to create works out of. And then for me also, the subway, there's just the subway system itself, whether it's in the tunnels or platforms or any of this, like the colors, all that stuff, like, and even old spray paint colors, stuff like that, those really still inform a lot of like my color sensibility and stuff like that. So I'd like to think that like I use a lot of aesthetics from graffiti, but I'm not trying to recreate graffiti necessarily. I'm just trying to like take some of those ideas and push them into like other directions. Of course, you know, the one kind of constant to my work is like letters and letter forms, whether it be abstracted or, you know, direct. That's kind of like something that I'm always interested in. And like a lot of the collages or a lot of abstract collages are of either like letters or of the negative shapes of letters and stuff like that. So it is kind of like, even though I do a lot of different series of work, that's kind of the one thing that really connects them all together.
Yeah, I mean, your artwork, you know, it speaks for itself. It has like its own unique style, and you can see the standards that you put on it, and it's honestly very inspiring to see. And even, you know, your approach, like hearing you talk about graffiti, just, you know, knowing that you've been in it for so long, it's honestly like very open-minded, and it seems like you just adapt with the times, you know, because it might be a common thing in graffiti where like, especially like older writers, they'll be like, oh, back in the days it wasn't like this, or, you know, I hate this, or, but you seem like honestly just like
it's something I enjoy. It's something that's fun. Like I said, it's something that informs what my work outside of graffiti and stuff like that. But it's funny you mentioned that. You made me think, like in 1988 I did a backdrop for a public service announcement for putting on your seatbelt, and it was with Heavy D and the Boys. And it's crazy because it was at this studio on White Street, which is close to where my studio is now. And and it was like, it was like whatever, 88. I had my boy, this guy here writes Face, not the guy today, but an older guy who wrote Face on the trains with me, and he was helping me out, and we got like $500, which was like, back then, 88 was like, that was like money for the whole summer, like, and they bought all this paint, and we got to keep like, I don't know, like 100 cans or something like that, so we were just like set for that summer, and but I remember when the day came, when they did the filming, and like we were there, I took a picture of Heavy D and the boys, and the guy Trouble T. Roy was still alive and whatever. And I remember, I don't know if Heavy D didn't want to be there, and like, you know, whatever, rest in peace, I don't want to talk ill of him, but he was just like, yo, what is this shit in the back? He was like, Graffiti's fucking played out. He's like, the fuck is this? Da 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 da. And I was like, oh shit. I was like, he's like, yo, this is played out, and da da da. And I was like, I'm thinking like, nah, shit is just getting fucking started. You know what I mean? So that always kind of bugged me out, that he was like, nah, this is tired and stuff like that. And I was just like, nah. I was like, it's because I think that's the other funny part about it, is when I started, like in the early 80s, it's like they had all these gallery shows, there were all these movies, they were kind of fast track, like Beat Street or Break In or whatever, these, you know, kind of had graffiti in it. And I think there was this real idea that like, hey, we got to fast track all these projects and these shows because this is a fad. Mm-hmm. It's going to run out, and it's just, you know, break dancing and all this stuff. They're like, oh, this is just going to be a fad, so let's make some money off and capitalize off it now. And so it's interesting to come from that era. I mean, even though I was the guy at the Fun Gallery at the Dondi show, you know, with my black book, being like, yo, sign my book, you know. Even though it's crazy, because I was in the room a couple of times with like, Keith and John Michelle, and like I was like, nah, those guys don't write on trains. I don't want their signatures in my book. Like I just like, they do like some weird art stuff, and I was more into like, you know, Dondi or Futura or Zephyr, or getting those guys in my book, Tracy 168. But yeah, I mean, it, you know, it's just, yeah, it's just something that's been a constant, you know. It's just like, it's, you know, like I said before, it's like, it's graffiti is what you make it. So it's like whatever, it's like, you know, some people like to go fishing, you know, some people like to go paint something, you know what I mean? So that's kind of where I'm at with it now. You know? So it's like, it's really more, like I said, just for myself. And like, if people can still dig it, you know, that's cool. Like I said, you know, for me, it's fun to have like a little bit here and there, be like, oh shit, like, look, this is still out here, you know? Yeah. As opposed to being like, yo, this guy's in his 50s and he's like bombing every night. Like, this is a little bit like cool, but I don't know, you know? So, but, you know, again, no judgment to other people. I mean, like, you know, I'm happy to see people come back and do shit and you know, still continue to paint and, you know, develop their styles and evolve their styles. Like, I think that's great. Because, you know, some people, they kind of just do one thing and that's what they do and that's that. There's nothing wrong with that either. But it's cool, you know, for me, like, as I said, I still draw a lot. So I still am always kind of develop. I mean, like, if I had the time to do all the pieces and stuff like that I have on paper and styles like that, there's just not enough time. But so, you know, like, I think I was looking through my photos of this year and I think I've done like 14 pieces. So it's not a lot. But I was like, all right. I was like, so I'm kind of destined to do one more, because I was like, I feel like I have to do at least 15 this year. Just not that it's arbitrary, it doesn't mean anything, but I just, there was a couple of years, maybe like 10 years ago, where I was starting to do like 60, 70 pieces a year, and I was like, yeah, not that it's about numbers or something like that, but just, I was just getting hyped that I was doing, that at this stage I was still having opportunities to do this much. Of course. So, but like I said, it's still fun. I mean, there's a lot of, you know, dumb shit around it, but.
Yeah, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show, and if you have anything else to say or any shout outs you want to give, any future projects that you have planned that you want to share, you're more than welcome to.
Well, shit, yeah, there's a bunch of things, I guess. Yeah, well, like I was mentioning before, we're doing a project with this place out in San Francisco called the Letterform Archive, and we're working on a book and an exhibition that's going to be in May of 2023, and it's basically a book that kind of talks about the magazine era of the 90s and kind of seen through my archive of stuff that I saved through the magazine, all the photos that was, and drawings and paintings and stickers and Xeroxes and stuff like that were given to me when I was doing the magazine. So, but we've kind of chunked up the book into like 4 main topics of just like kind of, obviously, since the place is a letter form archive, we're addressing like letter forms and stuff like that. And then there'll be a chapter on skills. Then there'll be a chapter on a bunch of like highlighting like 40 other magazines that were really important during the time. And then the last chapter is about kind of the community, which I think I kind of touched on before, which I think is like, no one's really done a deep dive into like this era. It's like, it's a lot of times you look at graffiti books, they're like from the 70s or 80s or like after 2000. So, this is a time, before the internet, and, a lot of people were making connections, stuff like that, like in other towns and worldwide. And so, like, I think it's like a really important kind of topic to talk about, and just kind of like, as far as the bridge from the earlier years to the internet and stuff like that. And like, I think I was saying before, like, I think a lot more people started to take documenting more seriously, and in some ways just take graffiti more seriously, in the sense of like, hey, this really is something. Of course I'm biased. A lot of times people ask me about graffiti, and I'm like, I kind of equate it to jazz. I was like, it's a lot of lost history. There's a lot of pioneers that are probably still, sweeping floors and stuff like that, and nobody knows who they are. And but it's also kind of like this American art form, so it's like something to be proud of. As far as other projects, I was supposed to be dropping a print today, so I'm a little bit slow on that. So I will be dropping a print. I did a print with a great printer out in San Francisco, a guy does Bloom Press, and basically we just did like a small edition of one color prints of like a couple of my illustrations, kind of mashed together, and then I hand colored each one of them, stuff like that. So they're all unique. And then, yeah, what else? I mean, there's a bunch of other things I can't talk about yet, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening in 2023. I mean, there's, like I said, I'm working on a bunch of different, like, kind of book and zine projects in various levels and stuff like that, because, like, I have done so much documenting, and so, like, it's like, I guess I'm glad that I kind of held stuff back. Like, I definitely post some things here and there, but I usually post, like, kind of like the photos that, like, I wouldn't use in a book, But there's also something about me that like didn't really want to put all this stuff on the internet, because like then people just take it and do whatever. Yeah. So, and even now, like there's so many books and stuff like that come out about graffiti and stuff like that, and I don't want to say that people are harsh about it, but like I think people want to see a book that they see images in they've never seen before. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that come out now, and you're like, well, we've seen a lot of this stuff already. So. So that's one of the other reasons why I want to try and make some of these books and some of these zine projects, because like I have a bunch of stuff that no one's ever seen. Mm-hmm. I mean, even just to talk about some of the Queens tunnels and stuff like that. Like I went down there so much and documented so much. Like I should probably update, because I probably have gotten more since then. But I like documented like over 400 names in like one layup, and I know there's probably more people that went there, but like I always thought it'd be kind of a cool project to kind of have like all these people painted here, like. They came from like far and wide, because like, again, early on, I was just like, people be like, yo, you Forest Hills, you write graffiti, what the fuck? Be like, yo, man, graffiti's like the spot in Forest Hills, man. I was like, you don't know it, and that's good. But I'm trying to think what other projects are happening I can speak on. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, obviously, I'm looking to do some shows and stuff like that. I've been making a couple bodies of work. Like during the pandemic, I made a bunch of new works that are like collage and paintings, stuff like that are more like using spray paint as part of the design. So it's like I've kind of like been just evolving and building on those things, and just continue to like do bigger collage works and bigger stuff. But yeah, I'm just just kind of rolling along. But like, yeah, I have a lot of projects that are coming up this year.
Cool. Well, thank you for coming on the show, and also thank you for gifting us this.
No problem.
Like we gave you the magazine that we've been working on, Living Proof, and it's stuff like this that really inspired us to do it. So thank you for bringing this to us.
No, my pleasure, man. No, I appreciate you guys having the patience and like, continue to come back and stuff like that, so that we could make this happen. So I
for sure, 100%.
Definitely want to come empty-handed. I want to definitely bring you guys something just out of respect for that. And
cool.
And what you guys do.
Man. Thank you so much for making it out here, speaking your knowledge. It's amazing to hear. I'm like a little kid in a candy shop listening to these
Thanks,
stories.
man. No, I mean, I feel like I could talk forever, but it's but if we're good, that's good.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the magazine, man.
Thank you, man.
Peace.